All right, what's up, everybody? This is Marcus Lewis, and this is episode 6 of the AskAJazzdude show, where saxophonist educator Michael Shults comes through and we talk about quality control in the jazz community. Let's start the show. It's actually episode 7. No. Let's start the show. All right, what's up, Mike? How are you doing today, man?
How are you?
Great. So, this is like the first time ever we're able to do a Skype integration on the show, so it's pretty awesome. It's the first.
Yeah.
How's the sound? Is that better? Did that sound go away?
Yeah, it's a little better. It's better now, yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right, so let's get right into the show, man. So the people out there that are watching, by the way, people who are watching, comment and just let us know what you think about the sound and all that, and tell us where you're streaming from. That'd be great. So, Michael, just tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I teach right now at Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is about an hour and change from the Twin Cities, about an hour and 5 minutes from St. Paul. University of Eau Claire, I teach saxophone and jazz saxophone. I head up the jazz combo program here, and then also teach saxophone. Did a master's in Cincinnati in 2010 and 2012. Then came back and did my doctorate in 2012 to 2014 that's when I moved up here. So lived in KC for 9 years before moving up here. Studied with Bobby Watson, Zach Sheeman, and Tim Timmons there at UMKC, and being part of the Kansas, big formative thing for me, and even though living in Kansas City anymore, I still feel really partial to that scene and that lineage.
Of course, yeah, man. So I want to actually play an example for everyone. Speaking of the scene in Kansas City, and just I'm gonna play an example, a video of you doing a really cool song on November 15th by Kenny Garrett. I really love this song. That album Songbook was like one of the greatest, during my college years. I would just listen to that all the time. And then, it's where I found that chord. There's that chord in that too. It's like C triad over D flat. I use that all the time because of it.
Yep.
So I'm going to play that, and then we'll talk about it, and then we'll get into some questions.
Yeah.
All right. So let me. It's always a notorious bass solo there, but for
Yeah.
the sake of time, I wanted to get right back into it. So tell us about what that tune means to you guys, or you, Michael.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's funny. Just recently, I've had a couple of students at Eau Claire that have been starting to get into Kenny Garrett,
Mm-hmm.
and it's interesting to me that album, which to me was just something that it came out in 1997, and to jazz like years after that. So it was an album that I just knew as sort of a seminal. Um, is interested in the music would be familiar with it. But just recently, I've had some students that I've had the pleasure of introducing that record to them for the first time, which is really awesome. For me, I mean, that's like one of the definitive, that Songbook album is one of the definitive albums of the 90s of that kind of power jazz aesthetic that I think is rooted in the tradition, but you hear a little bit spicier harmony and that whole band, that whole theme with Kenny Garrett was really incredible. And I think that tune, that's one of the most memorable of the record for me, one of my favorites to play. I actually just started playing it recently. This is from November. Fall was the first time I played it. So it's kind of a challenge. It's a 29 bar form, kind of in a regular form, and a good mix of sort of functional and non-functional harmony. So I think one of the best records of the 90s, maybe Kenny Garrett's best record, and for me that's like the on the record.
Awesome. Yeah, cool, man. So, yeah, for me, I totally feel the same way about that record. So, guys, this is a Facebook Live show. If you're just tuning in, this is Michael Shults, great saxophonist, educator, based out of Kansas City, but now he's in Eau Claire teaching those students there. Lucky to have you. So, yeah, guys, start to leave in the comments some questions for Michael to answer. What we love about this show is that we're just unscripted and we'll talk about anything. But let's get into our topic. I want you to speak on just a little bit of quality control in the jazz community. I think in certain other genres it happens a little more naturally, but in the jazz arena it seems a little different. So why don't you just speak on your thoughts about that, and then I'll kind of respond with my thoughts as well.
Yeah. Like a challenge of playing jazz, which is kind of a little bit, can be heady and a little esoteric and kind of abstract for virtuoso player, a pro level player, an emerging who's really not happening at all. Right. And what I see sort of an issue, a lot of the people that have influence, be they, media, club owners, promoters, sometimes aren't very discerning about the music. And so, like, the music per se, it has a lot more to do with the way that they promote themselves and the way that they invest both time and money into being image conscious and promoting their shows. So I think, I'm looking at Kansas City, and I was thinking about this weekend because the great thing about Kansas City is there's still a club scene. Like, one of the last places left, I feel like, where there's a lot of club gigs or list, specifically jazz clubs. And if you look at the Kansas City jazz calendar, it's Bill Brownlee and John. Incredible the amount, the sheer volume of gigs and music. But I was thinking about a friend of mine who's not a jazz musician was visiting. She's from Eau Claire, or from the area, but lives in Eau Claire now. She works with me at UW Eau Claire, and she was down in Kansas City checking out music. And I was thinking, and she was like, well, where should I check out some jazz music? And I was thinking about, I had to really look at that calendar and try and identify where to send her to listen, if that makes sense. Like, for instance, I'm thinking about Minneapolis, St. Paul, for instance. I've dabbled a little bit in that scene, just living here, just a little bit. And they have this scene, the clip that Saturday Night Jazz at the Black Dog, which is a series that's curated by a musician, really great trumpet player. And there's the thing that I love about that, I don't even have to check the calendar. I know that if I go to the Black Dog on a Saturday night at a certain time, I'm going to hear the best of the best in the city. And I think, we have to push harder as musicians and kind of cooperate a little bit with club owners and people on the publicity side of things to help make sure that, the offerings, the live where else.
Yeah, man, I totally agree with everything you said. I mean, I have some slightly different comments. I'll just piggyback off of what you said, but I think that part of it too is we times are changing. I guess it's always been this way, but I also feel that being a great musician, I think people get the idea from going to college that they can shed countless hours, which everybody should be doing. I'm not saying that that's not important. And then that someone owes them a gig. You know what I'm saying? It's I feel like you also have to be good at promoting yourself. You also have to be good at being a good human being so that people want to work with you. I think that you have to be appreciative of your audience. I think a lot of times just the reason why certain people that may not necessarily, and this is just in addition to what you're saying, may not necessarily get the gigs is because they don't appreciate their audience and people don't end up coming back to their gigs. I think you have to engage your audience. I think sometimes in jazz we think that because we've studied so much and we know a lot about harmony, rhythm, melody, form, theory, all these things. It's I think some people develop an attitude of I don't need to engage with people. They should just come to my show and then they should come to my show, listen to me, buy my CD, and then that's it. So, and then the thing you're talking about club owners, I just feel certain club owners don't necessarily choose the best music, and I don't know the reason for that sometimes. My goal is to actually interview some of them on the show and talk about what they're specifically looking for, how much are they invested in the scene, how much do they really know about the music, or how much do they really seek out the talent as well, as opposed to just being bombarded with emails. So that's kind of my addition to what you said.
Yeah, I know. I'm definitely not trying to call out. I mean, I have great relationships with some club owners in Kansas City still, and I mean, some of them are doing, they're really invested in teams and they treat musicians well. I'm certainly not the onus on them, but I think what you said is right. That as musicians, we're taking care of stuff and the way that we present ourselves on stage and our decorum to try and make the music more approachable, so that if you're doing sort of the legwork behind that, people to some other folks that maybe are doing all the legwork and all the promotional stuff and music isn't that strong. That
right
in the middle, I think, and people that write CD reviews or cover the music in a newspaper, we have to rise to that level. I say we, I'm in that club, but the people who I think have high artistic integrity, we have to be at that level from a promotional standpoint and not act like.
Right.
Yeah, and I think I've learned a lot from playing. I have a great relationship with John Scott at the Green Lady Lounge, and he's been really, really good to me and supportive of me. And I learned a ton. When the club first opened, I think it was like 2012 or somewhere in there, and I got a gig there, and it was my first time playing there. I think it was only a couple weeks. A trio with Peter Schlam and Seth Lee, and John wrote me a really clear email that outlined his dress code. You know, the musicians that play there know he has a strict dress code, all that stuff, and I kind of skimmed it. And just read it as, oh, look nice or something like that. So I showed up in like a collared shirt and some slacks and was definitely not following a while before I worked there again. And, you know, what I've seen with that, when he did that, when he instituted that dress code, you know, that the other clubs in Kansas City, a little bit of the musicians had to kind of, and that small thing of looking really nice and having a little bit of an image, really big effect on the way that music, even really abstract music, is received by lay people. Like, they can totally dig it if the musicians on stage have like a certain vibe.
Yeah, you know, I do think like image plays a part in it too. Though, like, there was an instance where I was playing at Noche in Des Moines. And this lady said, "Oh, I saw your big band at the Blue Room," and she was like, "It was the most diverse group of people in the crowd and on the bandstand I've ever seen at a jazz show." And so, like, you know, people do like hear with their eyes sometimes. You know what I mean? Like, if you're in a suit or whatever, you know, people are gonna probably take you, you know, more seriously. It creates a certain aesthetic, you know. She's just basically like, there are, you know, people from all places, and you have women in the band, and, you know, it's just like, it was really great to see that. So, you know, like, sometimes we think like the music is everything. It's super important. Don't get me wrong. I'm not like downplaying the music at all, but, you know, people do like, you know, they do hear with their eyes. You know, that's something that like an old guy told me, Sugarfoot from the Ohio Players. He told me, you know, it's like people, you know, people see with their hear with their eyes. So,
so a few years ago, he was saying that he felt like somebody asked him what was the difference.
Sorry, I didn't hear that because there was a police chase going on outside. What'd you say about Winton?
That's my old neighborhood. Where the studio is like a couple blocks from my old neighborhood, so I know a little too well. So Branford said in an interview that he felt like they go and hear music, and in the States people were like, "Oh, we're going to go see some music," you know, exactly. Like just the verb indicative consuming the music, and that's something I didn't really even consider until, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. And it has a huge effect to receive you, you know.
Yeah, for sure. I just want to take a second here to shout out some people that are watching. Adam Larson is watching from New York. Adam is a great tenor saxophonist. Sam Wiseman, Adam Slosman, Kendall Moore from Chicago is watching. Elaine Hernandez from Omaha is watching. Andy Swartz is watching as well. So thanks, guys, for tuning in. So if you guys have questions for Mike, just, you know, leave them in the comments and we'll start answering them. Because the goal of this show is the reason why it's on Facebook Live and not just recorded is for it to be interactive and to be unscripted. So yeah, start to leave any questions you have for Michael. So we're going to get into now, to give people some time to start sending questions, a video question. And this first question is going to come from Cody. And I think it's actually a really good question. So let's get into that video question. Here we go.
Hi, Marcus Lewis and Dr. Shults. My name is Cody, and my question is, what do you think about transcribing the more modern players versus transcribing the older masters of the music? Thanks.
All right. So what do you think about that?
The question, transcribing modern. What was it again?
Yeah, modern players versus the jazz masters that came before them. Like people like Bird, Train, whatever.
Man, I think ideally, you want to be making sure that you're pulling from. I think that everyone needs to go through a stress topic about getting into one player. That's something that I advise. It's something that I remember when I was an undergrad, Jaleel Shaw came to UMKC and he was talking about how he would tell students to spend like a full semester transcribing one person. And that kind of stuff is like, I think there's a lot of to that, but I also think it's really important eventually to make sure that you're pulling from a wide players, harmonic and melodic syntax. A blurry line there, in my opinion, because I can say, transcribe Harry Allen or Scott Hamilton. Like, they're contemporary, they're living, they're making albums today. But most of the material they play is really rooted in Ben Webster and Coleman Hawkins and, people from different eras. So I think what I found over the years, is that maybe a wider spectrum of people, if there's a Venn diagram between, the circle between the contemporary player and the master, there's more in that middle than maybe I would have initially suspected, if that makes sense. So
right.
I sort of draw a divide, and should I be checking out somebody contemporary and checking out somebody that, checking out Bird or Frankie Trumbauer or Sidney Bechet or whatever. And I think in doing some of that stuff, I've realized that actually have a common thread between what they're playing in different eras. Oh man, no, actually, by studying Bird, I'm skipping a lot of steps, and that, I felt super aesthetic, and I had a lot together, standard tunes, but actually when I had to improvise, over some of that music, I really had nothing together. I think if you're somebody that's only transcribing masters and you're not hip to some of the contemporary sounds that are happening, you're going to be at a disadvantage, and I think the reverse is true as well.
Yeah, that's great. I totally agree with that. It's I think, if you transcribe modern guys, you're going to find your way back to the people that we're listening to too. You know what I mean? It's so I think that if you're just transcribing, that's good.
Right. I think the other thing that happens, that happened for me is that, if I'm really honest, when I was Cody's age, I didn't really have any interest in Lester Young. I just didn't. In Ben Webster or whoever. Right. It was pretty much Bird on. And man, I have to say that I don't know what happened, if my taste changed or I just got older. Now, I enjoy music of that ilk so much more. It seems like more of the older I get, the a little bit farther back, because it's just a different aesthetic, and it almost sounds, in some ways, it almost sounds fresher than music that came after it, in a way.
Yeah, totally. It was the same thing for me. It was I got into, J.J. Johnson, because he was the bebop. He's the Bird for trombone players. You know what I mean? So it's all those guys that came before. Jack Teaguard and those guys. I didn't check any of that stuff out until much later. So yeah, I totally agree with that. Some people say your audio is cutting out. Are you using a microphone, or is it just your computer?
No, just my computer.
All right. So yeah. So how do you feel about before we have another video question too that we'll get into in a second? But how do you feel about also, I think, quality role in jazz? An issue that I have with jazz bands is we don't really rehearse enough, because everybody is just trying to get as many gigs as possible because they have to pay bills, But I don't think we really have bands anymore. Like Ambrose's band, Wayne Shorter's band. Of course, they're fantastic players. Like Ambrose is great, Walsh great. All those guys, Wayne, Danilo, John Patitucci, Brian Blade, all those guys are great. And I think that their whole vibe is more powerful because, for one, they're a band. They play together a lot, and I'm sure they rehearse. I think a lot of times in jazz, it's like we're lucky if we have one rehearsal, and you know what I mean, or no rehearsal. And sometimes I feel like cats are just like taking gigs and not really being invested in the music. But the people are like fantastic players. You know what I mean? So the music doesn't come off as being authentic. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's largely like, because I think that it used to be that maybe it seems like maybe it was easier to, like, I was talking to a very prominent like internationally known musician recently who's very established, who was saying how difficult it was to string together a tour like over and even really, really major label people, and they have their CD release tours. A lot of times it's like 8 or 10 gigs, right? So in order to piece together a living, you have to take on more projects. And as a result, because people are spread so thin, I think, playing in different bands, it's harder to get people together to rehearse. Like, I know if I tried to do an original music kind of thing in Kansas City, and if I want to call the best cast in town, the best people that I think are going to play the music the best, a lot of times those are also, for good reason, the busiest people. So it's hard to get them together to. I found that in some cases it seems like some of the best bands are not necessarily the best individual collections of talent. So maybe you get, 4 or 5 people together that are B-plus musicians that rehearse all the time and are constantly contributing new tunes to the book. In some cases, those bands are a stronger sort of group concept, which of 5 or 6 A-plus players that just show up. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay, so people are saying there's some issues. I'm just going to really quickly restart our Skype call, so I'm just going to call you right back. Hopefully the audio and video will clear up. So everybody just hang tight for a second. Yeah, so I guess talking about the whole concept of, but I think it's because people are invested in the music. You know what I mean? Those players that you're talking about are a lot of times invested in the music. So it's like, even though there's no rehearsal, they're definitely like bringing it. You know what I mean? As opposed to, like good players who are not invested in the music, they're just doing a gig. You know what I'm saying?
Like Bill Brownlee, for instance. I mean, Bill, I've been reading Bill's blog, Plastic Sax, for like, and I think one of his observations sometimes is bands playing original music or what he would say is adventurous, and I appreciate hearing that perspective, but I think it's a product of how busy people are in Kansas City because there's so many gigs. So I think if you're really busy with a lot of different projects and you're spread pretty, the option of being spread thin, maybe the fortunate side effect is, some of the groups that might play more original music, that's a little bit more difficult to do in town. So that's sort of a double sword to me. I see some other cities like that I don't think have quite the infrastructure when it comes to the number of available gigs and how the gigs pay. But sometimes there's more creative music coming out of those people in so many projects, if that makes sense. So it can kind of go both ways.
Right.
I would like to know what skills or lessons that you learned during your classical training that you most commonly use in jazz performance and vice versa.
So if you can hear the question, basically Sam asked, what skills have you learned in your classical training that you apply to jazz performance and vice versa?
Well, I think like some of them, I'm going to try not to nerd out about saxophones. I think just in terms of, I think playing both more difficult on our instrument than others because the musculature inside the vocal cavity is different, and also externally, like with your lip and the equipment that you play is much different. So a lot of my studies, have just dealt with the. But I think one thing that studying classical, especially with Zach Sheeman, we talked a lot about playing in tune and all the various alternate fingerings you can have as a saxophone player that would put you in tune based on your function in a chord or the volume that you're playing or, any number of factors. For me, most of the time if I'm in a jazz section, like in a big band, most of those guys that are kind of coming through that training background don't have that same art same way that classical players do. So that's, I think, playing in tune and really strongly considering like purity of sound has been a big influence in the way that I play jazz saxophone the past few years. Like mine has really evolved just in the past 2 or 3 years, especially. I think that's because of that influence of classical playing. And then in the reverse, like I definitely think when I approach classical music, I have there are certain excerpts in classical saxophone that are from the diminished scale, and or certain things, modes of melodic minor that we deal with in jazz all the time that, I'll get to a certain passage and I've already got facility.
Yeah, man, that's great. I
Right.
think it's very similar for trombone too, because when I was getting my master's, I was going to get a master's in jazz studies, and then the school that I ended up going didn't. I was supposed to be the first jazz studies major at this college, and I got there, and the program didn't end up happening. So I had to do like a lot of classical trombone stuff, and then the jazz stuff was just extra.
Right.
Yeah, but it definitely helps. I think it definitely helps. It's just like a different mindset, but it does all apply. Cool. So do we have any? Let's look in the comments here and see if we have any questions. Man, people are so shy today. So we did talk a little bit about quality control in the jazz community. So there's definitely some problems. So what are the solutions to kind of just put a bow on it? Like, what are the solutions for having a more quality jazz scene, not just in particular Kansas City, but anywhere?
Right. Well, I think it's kind of the stuff we talked about. We just have to make sure that like we're not the occupational reality that having a really good musical product is a given, and what's going to set you apart is kind of some of the extra stuff, And the hard thing, I think, is if you're really serious about music and you're really invested in trying to be a great player, it's sometimes difficult to step away from the horn or step away from writing for a minute so that you can spend time and effort and money. And so sometimes it's hard to really justify doing that, but maybe that's we all need to accept. Maybe in a bigger point, if you are somebody and you are somebody that's playing a lot, you have a good reputation and a little bit of power, to try and stick up and advocate for other people that you think are deserving of that, if that makes sense. I think...
Yeah, that's great.
Like Clint Ashlock helped me a lot. Clint, when I was coming up, he was kind of the first person that he was 7 years older, and he was kind of in the scene already. And he was the person, obviously we're really good friends too, but he was the first person I felt like that sort of heard that I was really working hard and that maybe I was developing a little bit of a voice, and helped me get established. Position is that it puts me in a position where, maybe I can be an influence and kind of stick up for people, whether that be looking at putting them in touch with somebody or towards their music. It's a unique position where I feel like I can sort of stand for quality's sake.
Right. That's great. What do what is like quality? Because like I made an Instagram post maybe about a month ago that was like people were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you said that." But it's like I posted basically like, if Thelonious Monk was alive, he wouldn't win the Monk competition. Because,
right.
And the reason why I said that is because I think a lot of times like people like I think we pretty much in general as jazz musicians give all the props to virtuosos. Like, you know what I mean? Like if somebody's like super burning and has like a ton of technique, like a lot of people like equate that with being good. You know what I mean? Like I can listen to players that, play technically like perfect, but the music doesn't move me personally. You know what I mean? Or on the other hand, I can listen to people that, have no technique and they're playing sad, but somehow they're getting gigs. And it's like, I don't understand that either. So it's like, how do we as like jazz musicians or whatever, as a community, like say what is good? Because a lot of times I feel like it's just like, man, this guy's like all over the horn, like, and people are like, that's killing. And I'm like, man, but like, it's not swinging or whatever. You know what I mean? You know what I'm getting at? Or
yeah, I know exactly what you're getting at. I think that's a tough thing because you do have to allow for a certain amount of personal taste because there are definitely people that there are other musicians that I respect have a high opinion of that I don't necessarily share, so it's obviously it's art, so it's subjective and there's nothing cut and dry. Like I've noticed especially with jazz musicians in particular, like I think we all take a certain amount of pride as people in being fairly open-minded, whether it comes to music or politics or ethics or whatever. I think a lot of jazz musicians take pride in that. And so that leads to people being afraid to sort of take a hard. So sometimes, I was just saying this to my dad recently via the phone, that sometimes things do self-evidently suck. Like I firmly believe that sometimes things would suck. Like they just on their face, they're not good quality. And I'm not saying we don't have to be. I really admire people that try to find the value in like any music. They try giving the person a benefit of the doubt. I appreciate that, but at the same time, I think in certain cases is making it nebulous to try and find the stuff that is good. So I think that like there's this term, the collective dig, where somebody is sort of crowned as like the reigning, famous jazz musician. They're on the cover of magazines or whatever, or they get a Grammy nomination or whatever. And in many cases, like if you really get good musicians to talk about it, to open up about it, they'll be like, yeah, I don't really dig that. And like kind of undercover, people sort of collectively know that so-and-so is not actually that happening, but nobody wants to speak up on it.
Right.
I don't know what I'm advocating. I'm not necessarily saying that we need to roast music, but at the same time, sometimes I think we try to be open-minded in the next, like it's a contest or something like that, and that ends up giving a certain level of credibility to things that actually just aren't that strong.
Right. Wow. That's well put, man. What up to Matt Ville watching us now? Matt Ville is a great piano player here in KC. Joe Schoonover, great guitarist. Yeah, man, it's a touchy thing because I think there's like musical talent and then there's like who you are as a person. Then there's also like how strong your concept or your idea of who you are as a musician and how well that translates
Right.
to your listener. Because also, like, I think a lot of players don't really have like they're great, but like technically or like musicians, but they don't have a strong sense of like or enough self awareness to like be strong in like who they are. You know what I mean?
Right. I know exactly what you mean, and that's something that honestly that and so I feel like I'm still kind of feeling that out. At age 30, I don't feel, a lot of times when I'm in a certain creative space where I'm not, my playing is not hampered by any self-doubt. I'm just like kind of in that space, where I'm playing what I'm hearing. And, but many other times, say something that's correct. And like sort of a balance there. For me, I definitely feel a little bit hampered by trying to give the right answers versus be like fully creative sometimes. I think it's really difficult trying to understanding chord scale theory and playing with good time and good feel and playing in a way that's rooted in syntax of the music, but at the same time, to really statement and develop a voice, you have to reconcile that with yourself. And that can be really hard. I'm sure you deal with it with future jazz too, where you're trying to stress to the kid the importance of doing your homework and having the tradition, but at the same time you're trying to foster a certain, personal musical voice. And I think that's really difficult to sort of reconcile those, sort of seemingly opposing ideas of structure and freedom in
Right. Yeah. So I guess closing, like we got a couple minutes, just a real quick question. So the majority of what things I do are my own original music. I want to start getting into playing like more, standard gigs and doing standards. How do you feel? Do you think there should be more? Because actually Herman brought up this a long time ago. He thinks that there should maybe be like a couple more clubs in Kansas City that actually support live music. I mean, not live music, but original music. Like, how important do you think that is for the scene?
I think it's really important, and I think, there's this thing about like is the club scene. The musicians are not dictating what's played on the club gigs. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. The musicians are acting to where the music is being played. And so in many cases, if you're playing at a restaurant, I mean, it's not really conducive to original music, the right volume level or have the right type of catchy melody or whatever, or be something that's recognizable. So that's important. But a lesson from Herman, like I grew up with Herman musically. We lived together for 4 years. And the thing that people have not given him he harvested a lot of the venues that people are playing in now. He had a lot to do with, like, he was either one of the first people to play there or he made the call to the club. So I think that, like in Kansas City, I'm speaking as sort of, dipping a toe in the water. The time is right for somebody to sort of cultivate a new venue that might be more conducive to playing original music. Because right now, like if I were trying to book a gig, I mean, I think Black Dolphin it seems like that might be happening there. Like I'm playing there in March 17th with Clint, and we're going to play probably a good portion of it will be original music that we rehearse a little bit. But I agree with Herman's point. I mean, I think one of the cool things the tradition of playing standards and knowing tunes and all that kind of stuff, but there probably could be a little between playing original contemporary compositions and playing standards.
Yeah. Killer, man. So we're gonna close out the show. You said you got a gig coming up on March 17th. You got anything else you want to plug? Do you have a project coming out or anything?
So I'm playing in Kansas City the 16th at the Blue Room and the 17th at Black Dolphin. And from Missouri and Warrensburg. And then playing, doing a little something with their jazz ensembles on the 12th. So I'll be back in the area those 2 times. That's about it, like, coming up for me. That's not sort of like just a little hit here.
Cool. So, yeah, I'm going to put a link up. I've got your socials down on the screen. Everybody want to find out more about Michael, you can go to his website, www.michaelshults.net. The link's on the Facebook right there, so you can find out more about him. He's really doing a lot for jazz scene, and also from the educational front. So it's really cool. So Mike, man, thanks for joining us on the first Skype ever Ask a Jazz Dude show. It wasn't perfect technically, but it'll get better. And thanks for taking the time out to do the show.
Yeah, man, thanks for having me, Mark. And congratulations on Charlotte Street, man. That's amazing. Very.
Thank you, man. Yeah. It's unbelievable. So I'm stoked. I can't believe it. But, it's kind of surreal, actually. It still hasn't really sunk in yet, but I'm going to try to make the most out of it. So, cool.
That's great.
Everybody, what was that?
I said they picked the right person. That was really great news to see that.
Oh, thank you, man. Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. All right, so guys, if you are watching on KKFI, tune in right now to Sam Wiseman's show, Jazz in the Afternoon. You can watch that or listen to that on kkfi.org. Thanks so much. This has been episode 6 of Ask Jazz Dude Show with saxophonist Michael Shults. Thank you for watching. See you next week, where our guest is Jen Wisemeyer from Kansas City Jazz Ambassadors. We're going to talk about the great things they're doing for the scene here in Kansas City. See you next time, squad.
All right. Thanks, Marcus.